And welcome back. We are now going to focus on adding the waterfall into our image here. And just going to give us another piece of animated textures that we can work with. If you remember, we made a nice foreground, midground, and background layer. Now, technically, we can, of course, add this in as part of our midground here. Now, I could create a separate folder, but what I'm actually going to do is make a folder here. I'm going to go ahead and put that inside of this folder because it is technically part of this midground. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename this folder as waterfall. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer here. All right, and what that's going to do is if I collapse this, you can see it's just simply this layer 5 that I have right here now. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename this as water, just so that I can kind of keep that separate from the other pieces here. Then the next thing I want to do is I want to pick the color that I'm going to use with my waterfall. So to get started, let's first start with the tone that we have here for the background of our mountain. So I'm just going to our color palette. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit lighter in tone. We're actually going to bring this closer to our blues here to give us a nice bluish color for our water. And switching to our brush tool, we're going to go ahead and let's just zoom this in a little bit here. And all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and paint in the areas that I want this water to be falling. So I might have it, for example, coming down these steps here, just bouncing from one to the other, and eventually coming down. Or I may have it coming across these steps here, etc. Or I could just have one solid waterfall coming out from behind this rocks here as well. So when I do this, the big thing to remember is as you start painting this in here, make sure you're on your water layer here. As you start painting this in here, and your water's coming in across the different pieces of the mountain, you just want to make sure that this water is completely filled in. You don't want gaps necessarily within the water that's coming off of the waterfall. And you're going to have the same thing over here. When you start painting these in, again, it's just going to be the water's coming down in the different areas. As it kind of just, you might just have it kind of trickling down to these different areas here. There we go. And that's looking pretty good there. All right. Before I actually get into animating, I need to go ahead and revisit this layer right here. And I'm just going to go ahead and create 4 layers on top of that. And holding down the shift key, go ahead and select those and make those into clipping masks, because what we're going to effectively do is we're going to go ahead and use these different layers here, to these clipping mask layers, I should say, to go ahead and create the different pieces. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with this first layer here, layer 5 that I have on my view. And I'm going to go back to my color selection. Now I'm just going to go ahead and make this a little bit lighter here, just enough so that when we start painting this in, it will be very visible. And what I want to do is on this clipping mask layer is I want to paint the top of this water pretty much completely. And then as I start moving down this pattern here, I'm going to effectively kind of almost like zigzag this just with little bits of water here to kind of effectively break that up. Same thing over here when I work on these smaller waterfalls that I made. I'm just going to go ahead and just make sure the top is painted each time. And then, of course, just break these areas up with more zigzags. Now, if they're pretty small, you can do just kind of like a straight line across. That's fine, too. And then we're just going to go ahead, and we don't want this necessarily to be this huge area like it is without just having a little bit of contrast. So we're going to just turn the opacity down on this just a little bit. And you can choose the value that's right for you. I'm going to go probably somewhere here around 32%. Just so enough you get a little bit of contrast here. So when we animate this, you will, of course, still have that original color, but you're going to have these softer colors here that are going to help break that up. All right, so now let's move to layer 6. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to, the reason why I made those nice and light before with the opacity at 30% is I wanted pretty much effectively to be able to shade in the opposite regions of what we had. So on layer 6, I'm just going to go ahead and now using that same color that I had, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the regions that weren't filled in the first time. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in. and make sure you get the top of the waterfalls again. And again, we're going to kind of try to shade in those areas that we didn't get the first time. All right, now the next trick here that we're going to do, and I'm just going to show you real quick, I'm going to go ahead and hide for now layer 5, and I'm going to go to layer 7, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to now fill in the areas that I didn't have filled in before. So let's take layer 6, and just for now take the opacity down just a little bit so we can have some contrast here. And on layer 7, we're going to repeat the process we did before. Fill in the top of that waterfall, fill in the areas that weren't shaded here. And the reason why I'm not just copying these areas is because I want this animation to be unique across more than just 1 or 2 frames. I want a couple different frames of animation to be used here. All right, now I do have one more layer to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. And what I want you to do is go ahead and touch these up. And when you're done, make sure you take the opacity on each of these other layers and bring them back up to 100% because we're going to be making our animation. All right, welcome back. At this point, you should have gone ahead and added in all your different pieces here to the 4 layers, bringing the opacity back up to 100%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose to create that frame animation that we are at this point pretty familiar with being able to do. And I'm just going to go ahead and choose to create 4 of these because remember we created 4 different clipping masks here. So this is effectively frame 1. Oh, let's do this frame 2, frame 3, and frame 4. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to go ahead and set so frame 1 is on that first frame. Frame 2 is on the second. By now, of course, you should be pretty familiar with how this process works. And let's just double check that, make sure we have everything the way we want it. And right now I have no delay on this, so if I run this, you can see it's moving very quickly. But if I want, I can go through and change all these here to 0.1 second here. So I just held down the shift key to select each of those at once. And let's go ahead and play that. And you can see it's a little bit slower looking, and that still is pretty good looking as well. Again, that's a nice animation there. And I'm just going to go ahead and Control 0 to zoom this back out. And I want to see how this might look if we were to put something else in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up my character idle that we had previously done. So here's one of my little dudes that I had made. And what I want to do is I want to bring this character here on over into this animated background. So with this guy being open, I'm just going to go ahead and select those layers that were the jump animation here. So I have jump 1, jump 2. And I'm just going to go ahead and bring those on over into the animated background that we had done. And let's go ahead and just drop him on in here. And it might try to drop it, for example, the waterfall layer. So all I can do is I can just grab those, and I want to put those at the very top here because I want him to be above everything. And while those are still selected, I'm going to go ahead and group those, and I'm just going to call this character. And since the character is probably going to be with the foreground, I can grab that folder now and move it into this foreground folder. So there's my character right there. And I can then, of course, once that character is selected, I can, of course, move him around just as normal. So let's say, for example, I want him to be right here. And if I zoom out of my picture just a little bit here and go ahead and run this. Oh, looks like I forgot to move him appropriately for each frame here. So I'm just going to back this up just a little bit. All right, and you can see how he is now in here. If I wanted to animate him between those different pieces, of course, I can go through and cycle this so that way he is animating between each of those, just like how we would do otherwise. So, for example, if I want him to cycle between these in the different jump sequences, I can go ahead and animate those accordingly so that way he will come in here and jump accordingly. because again, we want to make sure we set this up so that way when this character's in here, he is animated. All right, so you can see he's now in there as well, and he is pretty happy to move. So we, of course, now have created a animated background here, and you can see how easy it is to add just additional elements in here into our canvas as well. So that is going to be a pretty good image for us to work with. Now there is one more thing that we can do with this image, and that is to add something called parallax effects, which we will look at next time. But for now, look at what we've done with this background here, and I think this is a pretty good stopping point for today. And we can, again, look at how we can enrich